obtain.
How can you create an offline address, and then how does the Bitcoin network know about this address if you've never been online? How will the Bitcoin network find out about this address? And this is really interesting because it speaks to a fundamental aspect of the system, meaning that addresses are just numbers. You could pick one out of randomness. You generate a key, of course, not an address directly. You generate a key out of randomness, just picking a number at random from a huge range of numbers, and that produces a unique Bitcoin address. Unique not because you check that nobody else has it, unique because the chance of someone else has it is about the same as winning 1 million lotteries in a row. So the bottom line is that's how you create these keys and addresses. Now you've created the address, the network doesn't know. The beauty is the network doesn't need to know. That address doesn't exist until someone tries to send money to it. And when someone tries to send money to it, then it becomes part of the Bitcoin network. So let's say you generated an address offline. And in fact, you don't even need a computer to do that. You could use dice, playing cards, a coin. Flip a coin 256 times, write down the 0, 1, tails, and heads numbers, produce a 256-bit private key. Then go through the laborious manual exercise of converting that private key into a public key with elliptic curve multiplication. It's very difficult to do, but you can do it with pen and paper. And then go through the even more laborious process of doing SHA-256 on paper and RIPE-MD on paper, and you could produce a Bitcoin address. Not only one that hasn't been online, one that has never seen a computer. It's just a number. You just did a series of calculations. And now you have a Bitcoin address. Great. Well, you could then give that Bitcoin address to someone and say, send money to it. And they could type it into their wallet. Or if you're really adventurous, you sit down and you draw a QR code by hand. That is also possible. And they scan it. But let's say you're not that adventurous. You just give them the Bitcoin address. They type it into their wallet. They construct a transaction. That transaction will consist of sending or spending an amount from their own Bitcoin funds to your Bitcoin address that has never been seen before. Specifically, actually what it's doing is it's constructing a locking script that says, upon presentation of a public key that when double hashed is equal to this Bitcoin address and a digital signature that matches this public key against this specific transaction message, you may release these funds. And so that transaction is recorded on the Bitcoin blockchain and it just sits there. If nobody claims it, maybe that Bitcoin address was generated in a weird way and doesn't even have a corresponding key. That's called a burn address. It doesn't need to be a real Bitcoin address. Of course, if you lock funds to an incorrect or fake Bitcoin address, then those funds effectively become locked forever because there is no unlocking script that can release them. However, in the scenario we just discussed, you actually wrote down in binary a private key that you constructed by flipping coins or whatever. And that private key was the basis of the Bitcoin address you gave your friend. So you actually have the ability to construct an unlocking script. So then you could either import that private key into a wallet and spend the money that your friend sent you, or you could even construct a transaction by hand that says, here's an unlocking script, here's the public key, here's the digital signature, please spend this money. And if you transmit that transaction to the Bitcoin network, it will match the unlocking script to the Bitcoin address you produced earlier. It will say that means you are the correct owner. It will be a valid transaction and you will spend the money. The Bitcoin network doesn't need to know about addresses because addresses effectively are just locking scripts. And if you decide to lock something or an amount to a locking script that is invalid or doesn't correspond to an address anybody's seen or even corresponds to an address for which there is no key, what you've effectively done is you've buried treasure without a map. You've locked a lock without a key. and that money is gone forever. It can never be retrieved because there is no valid transaction that can unlock it. But if you do have a valid key behind that, the Bitcoin network doesn't care. It will sit there with the locking script. That amount will sit there locked up until you present the unlocking script that allows you to spend it. And until then, the Bitcoin network doesn't care. It just sits there. Which also has another interesting implication. How many Bitcoin are sitting there with locking scripts that cannot be unlocked, or for which the keys have been lost, or for which there are no keys? The answer is, in many cases, we don't know. Some are obvious. There are some addresses and locking scripts on the Bitcoin network today that have locked funds that we know mathematically can never be unlocked. Those Bitcoin are lost forever. There are some that are locked to addresses where the keys have been lost and we don't know that they've been lost because it's impossible to tell. There will never be an unlocking script because there is no private key, or until at least a quantum computer can produce a private key by reverse engineering that address, and even that is very tenable for the next several decades.
میهن بلاکچین